Welcome to Cineverse, to join the universe of cinema with me, Burhan Ratlami, and today we are going to talk about the topic camera specifications. So what are the camera specifications? The camera specification comprises of 5 major parts. First is ISO, second is aperture, third is shutter speed, fourth is frame rate, and fifth is zoom and focus. So what are these 5 specifications? We will learn more about in detail. So let's start with our first point, that is shutter speed. What is shutter speed? Shutter speed is the number of times a shutter flicks in a second. So the shutter is the most important factor to keep in mind when you click a photograph. Why? Because if you are using appropriate shutter speed in clicking your subject, then you will have the perfect sharpness in your image. Like take an example, if there is a vehicle moving in front of your camera, so if you want to capture that moving object, you need to keep your shutter high. That could be 1/500 or 1/320, 1/400. This could be your shutter speed to capture the automobile. Let's take an example of eagle. If there is an eagle flying high and you want to capture the fast moving eagle, what would be your shutter speed? So you can keep your shutter by 1/1000 or 1/1250. It will help you to freeze the movement you are capturing, and it will provide you the sharp image of the eagle. So let's take it as an example of vice versa. If the eagle is flying high, eagle is flying in speed, and if you want to capture it, and if you keep your shutter around 1/25 or 1/200, let's take an example 1/200 or 125, you can't get that focused image, you can't get that sharp image you want in your camera. It will be a bit of blurry, it will be a bit of out of focus image. Why? Because it can't capture the movement, the speed, and it can't freeze the scene that the high shutter could. So that's the major difference between the slow shutter and the fast shutter. And the slow shutter is as much as important as the fast shutter. How and why? So let's just take an example. If you want to show the motion in your pictures, if you want to show the crowd, and if you want to figure out one single person from the crowd, so what can you do? You can lock a focus on a single person, and then if you keep your camera on slow shutter, you can see the crowd which is surrounding him will be out of focus and will be seen in the motion, which will give your photograph a very good effect. So that's why both has its uttermost importance in the photography. Either take slow shutter, either take fast shutter. Okay, let's take an example of portrait. If you want to capture a portrait, you might keep your shutter speed 1/25 because it will freeze the movement exactly you want. The reason is the person or the portrait or the model you have in front of a camera will not have that much movement which you need to freeze. And another example we can add, where you want to show the portrait or when you want to show the person in motion. Let's take the example, if you are shooting an athlete, so he is running, so this is her position, okay, and if you want to capture her in this position of running and you want to showcase the athletic mode or athletic vibes, then you have to keep your shutter high because she will be in movement and you need to freeze that movement to give the best experience to the audience too, and to give the vibe of an athlete. So this is how the shutter speed varies and how you can make your photos more interesting just using the shutter speed. Let's start with our next camera specification, that is ISO. So what ISO stands for? It stands for International Organization for Standardization. And what ISO do to our photographs? So basically, if you increase the ISO, you are allowing camera to enter more light into your photograph, and vice versa, if you decrease the ISO, there is a less amount of light that is entering into your frame or into your photograph. So if you increase the ISO, there will be chance of your image having more grains as compared to less ISO in your image. So what is preferred most is to keep the ISO minimum and less than 1000, so you can avoid grains in your image. If you want to edit your photograph later in the Photoshop and your image is grainy, it will be a difficult task for you, and it will be toughest task for you to remove the grains from your image. So The most preferable ISO is less than 1000 as it keeps the image perfectly exposed and there is a very less amount of और ना के बराबर आप कह सकते हो grains होते हैं आपके photograph में. Let's start with our next specification, that is aperture. So what is aperture? Aperture basically decides the amount of light that will enter into your camera sensor. So where the aperture is placed? The aperture is present at the back of your lens, that is a metal ring you can see. So what does aperture actually do? So when you keep the shallow aperture, what is shallow aperture? Shallow aperture is around 1.8, 2.8, 1.4, that is called shallow aperture. And what it helps? It helps us in capturing the most beautiful bokeh effect. If you keep your aperture shallow, that is around 1.8, you can have the beautiful bokeh effect in your image. And in common language or in simple language, if we say, you will have the best blur image in your photograph. If you want to have a detail in your image, if you want to keep more detail in your image, then you will go for the wider aperture. Wider aperture means f11, f16, f15, f18. So what this will help? This apertures will help you to extract out the details in your picture. Let's just take an example. If you want to capture the mountains or if you want to capture the landscapes, you need to keep your aperture high or wider. So what is the wider aperture? It could be f11, f18, f21. So why this aperture is used? Because you need to extract details later in your Photoshop. Like if you want to do the aggressive color grading, or if you want to manipulate or change the photograph, then you need the details to be there in the image, and the wider aperture will help you to extract out the best details out of your photograph. So that is the importance of the wider aperture, and as we discussed earlier, that is the importance of shallow aperture. So what do you understand by both the terms shallow and wide? So both terms help us to understand how or what amount of light enters into your camera. If you keep your aperture wider, so there is a very less amount of light that is entering into your frame or entering into your sensor. If there is a less amount of light entering into your sensor, it will naturally or directly affect your shutter speed and ISO. So basically you will have now decrease the shutter speed, either you have to boost your ISO to keep your frame perfectly exposed, and just do it vice versa if you are opening or if you are using the shallow aperture, that is 1.8 to 2.8. so the more amount of light is entering into your frame, now you need to boost your shutter speed and to decrease the ISO. So this is what all exposure triangle is about. So these are the major three specifications of the exposure triangle that we discussed, is shutter, ISO and aperture. One more thing to add, if you are using shallow aperture, that is like 1.8 or 2.8, then your lens will have a wider opening, and if you use the wider aperture, that is f18-21, your lens will have shallow opening. Okay, so keep that thing in your mind, so this will not confuse you why there is a less amount of light entering in your frame or why there is a more amount of light entering into your frame when you are getting details, when you are getting the bokeh. So all these things are interconnected with each other, and this will help you to click the perfect picture or the perfect photograph for your partner, for wherever you travel and whatever you click. Okay, let's move to our next camera specification, that is FPS. What FPS stands for? FPS stands for frames per second. And what is a frame? A frame is a single photograph that is taken by a camera in a second, in 1 second. So if you want to shoot a video or if you are planning to film a video, then there is a preferred FPS rate, that is 25, that is Indian standard of FPS. Why 25 FPS? What it do to your video? So 25 FPS is basically 25 photographs taken in a second to keep your video in a motion. So that is 25 FPS, 25 frames taken in a single second by your camera to provide the motion to your photographs for your video. So, and if you want to freeze the moment, if you know that you want to slow it down later in the Premiere Pro, or you want to slow it down later in any editing software XYZ, so what will you do? You will increase the FPS. Why? So the logic is very much simple. Why to increase the FPS? Because if you are shooting on 60 FPS you will have more frames in a second that you can easily slow down in Photoshop in Premiere Pro later. As compared to Indian standards, 25 fps is the most preferred, and as compared to US standard, 30 fps is the most preferred fps used in the cameras. So if you want to go for the slow motions, or if you want to slow your video down later in the Premiere Pro or any editing software, you need to keep your fps higher. Like if you keep your fps 60, 90 or 120, that 120 is the maximum fps you can take your camera to, and if you keep your 120 fps, then you will be easily able to slow it down later in Premiere Pro. So that is the purpose and the main reason we use fps in a frame, to make our video, to make our film look smooth and transition free. Now let's take the next camera specification, that is zoom and focus. So what zoom and focus do to your image? So I am right now holding a camera lens in my hands, and as you can see, the upper ring, this is called the focus ring, and the lower ring, it is called the zoom ring. Okay, so if you rotate it, you can see there is a measurements written here, that is 24, 35, 50, 70, 105. What are these focal lengths? This focal length helps your camera to determine the distance of the subject from your camera sensor. Okay, so if you are keeping your lens on 24, you are capturing the wide scene, if you are capturing the scenario, you are capturing the family photo and so on. Like if you want to capture more and more space, you will keep your camera lens on a wide focal length, that is 24. Then if you take it to 50, now if you want to go for the portraits, if you want to go for the single person in your photograph, or if you want to take a photograph of 3 to 4 friends enjoying the party, or if you want to take the candidates, then you can go for the 50 focal length. It will help you to beautifully frame the friends. And on the last, if you keep the focal length on 105, so 105 focal length is basically preferred when you want to keep your subject sharper and when you want to go with your background in a depth. So this will do, this will make your background shallow and your subject will be in sharp focus, and this focal length is mostly preferred for a single person in a frame, or for a couple, or for more than maximum 3 people in a frame. So that is what the use of zoom ring is. And the upper ring, that is focus ring, when it is used, so it is generally used when you shift your focus from auto to manual in your camera. So the most preferred focus is manual focus, and when you are shifting to manual focus, then this ring is the most helpful to you, the upper ring. If your subject is standing around 20 to 25 meters from your lens, then to keep the subject in the sharp focus, you need to rotate this ring, and you will see in the camera, if you rotate this ring, there will be a slight shift of focus from the foreground to your subject, and you will see how sharp the focus ring will make your photograph. So this is what the use of focal ring and the zoom ring is. We are going to talk about the topic important effects and its contrast. So in this topic, we are majorly going to talk about different important effects and its contrast. So first topic is grain. So what is grains? I will not dive into deep what is grains, and I will not confuse you through the lengthy and long definitions, but we will just understand what is grains through an easy example that is visible on your screen. Now let's move to the next topic, that is sharpness. So what is sharpness and why it is important in your film? So sharpness is how clearly detail is rendered in a photograph. To understand this topic in more detail, let's understand this through an example. Thank you for listening to me. Take care, have a good day, and I'll see you in the next course.